farmers have been selling, I think, this week, and maybe you can confirm that, corn at a fairly rapid pace. First, confirm that for me. Is that truly the case?
Definitely the case.
And from MIDCO and Bloomington also the case, yes?
I would agree.
And TGM has been buying a lot of corn. Oh, so you all sold. So were they all right?
Yes. Yeah. Before the January 10th report, cash grain was under $4 at several elevators in our area. Now we're at $4.50 to $4.60 cash. So yes, you have to take advantage of a 60-cent rally based on whatever, if it's the Ukraine, if it's whatever, there's still a lot of corn. We still have a lot of corn, old corn left to sell, and we preach selling into rallies, and this is a rally, so I think it's the right thing to do.
He mentioned Ukraine. Is that the driving force in this process?
I think this week, anyway, it has been. Of course, that we do have some underlying positive impacts on corn demand. Export demand obviously has been very strong up to this date, so I think we're seeing some underlying support from those. But the crux of the rally this week has been the concern about taking Ukraine out of the world corn and wheat markets moving forward if this situation with Russia would continue to escalate, and some of that business most likely switch back to the U.S., and I think that continues to be a positive, at least this week anyway.
Other underlying demand factors?
Well, I think that's pretty well where we're at. I think, the main thing whenever we get in these situations, we've all said there's been a fair amount of grain sold, but, also there's been several guys that indicated they might be willing to sell at the 455, 460 level. And, last night, 2 nights ago, we were up 18 cents on the corn market. And if you didn't have an offer in, you had to have a pretty quick trigger finger there yesterday during the trade. So, yes, this has been a driving force. This Ukraine situation has been a great opportunity to push your sales, but if you don't put an offer in, sometimes it's pretty tough to get it done.
Todd, you mentioned demand, and one source of demand that we haven't talked about yet are the funds. The specs have increased their position in all 11 major ag commodities over the last several weeks, and that has been a big reason for this run-up in prices. Why exactly the funds have chosen to buy, who knows, but they have. Before the January 10th USDA crop report, the funds were short corn, short a record amount of wheat. They were long beans, but not near to the extent that they are now. And that January 10th report caught a lot of people, traders, funds on the wrong side of the market. Ever since then, the funds have been big buyers. The funds now own 1 billion bushels of beans on paper. We grow 3 billion bushels here in the U.S. The funds own 1 billion. So they own 500 million bushels of corn. Not quite as big a percentage as what they do in beans, but that has been a big reason for the run-up in prices. Can they add more? Yes, in corn. I mean, they're not near a record long corn position yet, but I think the farmers continue to do the right thing and use this as an opportunity to make sales, because we all know the funds don't use any of this. What they buy, eventually they will sell back.
How quickly do you think that'll happen?
Well, the fundamentals for corn would suggest that maybe that March 31 acreage report, which we've alluded to, is going to be very important. If the corn acres aren't near as high, maybe the funds hang into their corn position, but old crop beans look scary. I mean, I know they can go higher because China continues to buy beans. So the offset is there is real good demand for old crop beans, but the funds do own 1 billion bushels, and that's just, I would be very leery to own old crop beans at these kind of prices.
Matt, you're shaking your head. You agree with that?
Yeah, I'm not real friendly to the bean market, and I think, simply from if you put your farmer's hat on, being able to be in the cash grain business and also farming as well gives you a pretty interesting dynamic at times. And I think one thing that I want to encourage guys on is, there's been times this past winter that several people have been aggravated that they had missed a chance at $13 beans, and some of those guys haven't sold at 14 1/4 here in the last week or so. So, what'd your beans?
That adds to the aggravation.
What'd your beans make last year? I think most of us had a pretty good bean crop, and so my challenge for most of my producers is that whenever you're marketing at profitable levels, you're making money. It's not rocket science. And so if I had 55, 60 bushel beans last year and I didn't sell them at, 14 and a quarter, to me, 2 days from now, we could be looking at a situation that is $1 lower pretty easily. I think all of us would agree, and anybody that talked today would agree, that the bean market is in kind of a precarious situation. You have an extremely tight domestic situation, and then a little bit different as far as the world goes. Now, I know that South America's production might be a little bit less than what we thought it might have been 3-4 weeks ago, but bottom line is it's still an enormous crop. And so, I'm not, whoever's buying beans on the board has got a different plan than what I do. I don't have that kind of guts.
Aaron, do you have that kind of guts?
No, I think you got to take advantage. I think that the cancellations are coming. I mean, the balance sheet on the U.S. just cannot continue to support these sort of export sales we're seeing, and China continues to hang around in the U.S. market. If you were a buyer of beans in Brazil last year, you got burnt pretty hard having to wait in line for 60 to 90 days to load your boat now, and China's just not willing to do that. They have this kind of a two-tiered system in Brazil now where you can have like a public berth or a private berth, and China's just not willing to pay the premium on this private side, so they continue to turn to the U.S. to buy beans because they know they can get loaded. But at some point, something's going to have to give. You look at 150 carry-out, and if you add another 100 million export sales on there, that gets pretty tight pretty fast, and the market just can't support that sort of situation. So something's going to have to change here at some point this spring and summer.
Yeah,
so,
but the sales are on the books, right?
Yeah, but the sales on the books doesn't necessarily mean they'll be delivered. I mean, if you look at the two different reports, we have export inspections on Monday morning and export sales on Thursday morning. There can be some divergence in that, and we've proven over the years that China's pretty good at having things kind of disappear.
What if they just roll them forward instead, Greg?
That happens. They may purchase something for nominal June, July, August, and then change the delivery period to September, October later on. So the purchases stay on the books, but they just kind of move from old crop to new crop. Others are optional origin purchases, which means they can cancel out of the U.S. and replace them with purchases out of South America. If you're buying from a Cargill or an ADM or a Bunge, somebody that has facilities in both North and South America, they can do that. So until they're actually shipped and on the boat, you never say never.
Well, here's the question, because you're all saying, hey, make the sale, and we're in old crop still, of course. Go ahead and make the sale. These are awfully good levels. You've got some guys that are aggravated, but how, and you're worried that maybe tomorrow $1, but can't you drag this part out some by rolling, if they really do originate in the United States, by rolling forward, and how far forward can they roll, and how long can you drag it out? I mean, and what difference does it make that the crop is coming out of Brazil and Argentina at that same point?
Yeah, I didn't hear anybody say that we didn't think beans could go higher, old crop beans, because the farmers are basically out of old crop beans. So it's kind of like a poker game, and you're getting down to two players. One, who's going to blink first? The guy that needs to buy that last boat, or the guy that's holding on to the beans that didn't get them sold? So can beans go to $15? If China continues to buy beans out of the U.S., the answer is yes. I think what we're saying, though, is the risk versus reward. We know we can make money selling $14 beans. We knew we could make money selling $13 beans. That's why, I, anyway, advocated selling $13 beans.
And everybody loves him for it.
Yeah, I've heard about that this morning, by the way.
I'm glad you were the only one.
Yeah, I'll take that one. But my point is, you look at the supply and the demand. I mean, South America's got this big crop. We are going to plant more beans. I'm just convinced of that. So longer term, we are headed lower. That's not to say that we can't spike up another 50 cents in the short run, but over time, I think we're headed lower in beans.
Yeah, and I would definitely agree. I think whenever you look at this, if you're still holding on to old crop beans, I guess the way that I try to explain it to my farmers is that, in my opinion, you're extremely profitable on your 13 beans, and so it's a great time to go ahead and move and focus on the new crop. And then whenever you look at the new crop, obviously, you have to be considering, what if we do fall out of bed, like some of us are indicating could happen. I mean, obviously the bean market could hang in there, but can you stomach a dollar drop, in the bean market? And at times this winter, we've been a limit down day away from sub $10 beans. Okay, and so I know we're not there right now. We're 2 limit days away from $10 beans, but don't think that that can't happen pretty quickly. And is our psychology ready, to tackle sub $10 beans? And, I'm not saying that that's going to happen in the next week, 2 weeks, but by all means, I think that somebody in this room, if we have any crop at all, is going to be selling beans under $10 that they grow in 14.
Transition, as you already have begun to do this for new crop, the buoyancy in the old crop market, what it means at this point, and whether beans are a sale and what you can actually get for those at this time.
I think that, in my opinion, whenever you're looking at beans in that 1150 area, given most people's cost structure that we work with, they can be profitable at average yields selling at 1150. Now, I'm not saying that a person needs to go out and sell all the beans for fall delivery, but if you've been paying attention, you can buy a short-dated put option, which we've been doing pretty aggressively, and right close to the money for 20 cents or under. So we've been buying some 1160 puts, basis the NOV that expire in May. Gives you 2 months to look at it. It's costing you $1,000 to cover 5,000 bushels. I think it's an excellent way to put a floor into the under your fall beans, because if this cash market does fall apart, it's going to be awfully tough to get in the way of it.
Aaron?
Yeah, I really don't have a whole lot to add. I think you got to continue to scale up sales on November beans, either on the cash side or some sort of put strategy. I think the downside is just too great of a risk here as we move forward, especially if the weather cooperates. And I think at this point you got to assume good weather. It's kind of dangerous not to at this point. As far as basis for the fall, I think you're going to continue to see strong basis levels for beans in the fall. We've had this very aggressive plan, or at least by China anyway, to be very aggressive buyers of soybeans, at least from the U.S. in the fall, and that's going to continue to keep basis pretty well supported, at least through the first 3 to 4 months of harvest like we've seen the last couple of years.
We'll get Greg's attention on the new crop in just a moment. Anybody got a question that they want to ask these guys? All right, well, I'll continue to ask questions, but I want you to help me out. So, Greg?
I just want to remind everyone that every million acres of beans is roughly 50 million bushels. We planted 76.5 million acres of beans last year. The Ag Outlook Forum says 79.5. That seems very low to me. If you look at where your February crop insurance prices ended up, corn was $4.62, beans were $11.36. Just based on that, that's a ratio of 2.49 to 1, which is the highest bean-corn ratio in the last 6 years. I think farmers are going to plant more beans than 79.5 million acres. I've heard estimates all the way up to 82 and a half. So just keep in mind that every million acres is 50 million bushels. And when we're talking about 150 million bushel carryout, bad weather could get us down to 100. Good weather could get us up to 300. So, $10 to $12 beans is probably the range. I know that doesn't narrow it down very much, but I would echo what these guys have already said. We need to get some new crop beans on the books, and then if we look at buying a put, selling a call type of thing, we call it min-max. Lock in a floor, but yet give yourself some upside. And I know a lot of people haven't been exposed to options, but there are ways to lock in floors, even if you really don't want to trade options or understand them real well. But I think you need to do that, because the variability in price potential this year is huge in beans, because we're just one bad crop away from high prices. But with the extra acres we're planting both in South America and here, prices could get a lot lower. So we need to be flexible, but we need to protect ourselves.
Go ahead and transition to corn for me.
Looking at new crop corn, I think your basis levels actually in corn, it's been interesting to see, the old crop basis is held together for so long. I mean, Aaron and I were just talking yesterday. There's not a whole lot to talk about because we haven't seen a whole lot of change in basis. Now, we did move to the May, and really right at the time that we did that, we lost 3 cents. But bottom line is basis has pretty much been boring to watch. Talking about the Oscars, similar to me watching the Oscars with my wife on Sunday evening. But
He was tweeting about that.
It
I
was
suspect
not-
she was not reading it.
I didn't watch for long, trust me. But, looking at new crop corn basis is actually pretty good. You'll see anything from, in our area, 25 to 30, 35 under. And I think, to me, looking at new crop sales at the 450 and above level is pretty decent for most guys. Again, I'm looking strictly at this as a profitability situation. If I can make a guy profitable looking at what his costs are, then we need to be selling some. And I think that there's a lot you can do. If you feel as though maybe you're getting over hedged, you can also hedge your hedge. Simply buy some calls because they're very cheap. And so I'm selling corn at the 450 and above level, at a pretty decent clip.
I'm gonna pause them on the corn market for just a second because I want the outside guys here to take up wheat real quick, and maybe because the Andersons handles an awful lot of soft red winter wheat. That's the kind of company they have been and remain once you get up to the Great Lakes area. What are we talking about in wheat, and what are producers doing, or should they be doing?
We plant 10, 11, 12 million acres of corn and beans in the state of Illinois. We plant 800,000 acres of wheat, and all of that's basically in the southern third of the state.
It's all Washington County.
Yeah. So we don't have a lot of wheat that's grown in this area. In years past, the wheat carry in the market has been tremendous. I mean, 60 cents, 70 cents from year to year. So the market was basically telling farmers and elevators alike to store wheat. So that's what we did. The carry is not that good now. So the wheat market is basically going to be very minor, I think, in Illinois this year. It's bigger in other places, but overall wheat acres were unchanged from last year, 800,000 acres in the whole state.
Okay, that's it on wheat. Anybody got a question? All right.
Nothing too exciting.
Nothing too exciting. Okay, so let's continue on with corn for just a bit. He laid out his version of the corn market. How about yours, Aaron?
Well, I got to agree with Matt. I think you got to continue to be scale-up sellers here as we approach this $4.75 to $5 area in new crop. Not as optimistic on corn bases this fall as maybe would be on beans. I think last year, or at least the last couple years, has been a challenge, at least on corn basis from the elevator side, of course, because it's pretty simplistic in the elevator market. You want to buy low and sell high, just like you do in most other things, right? And the elevators had to pay more for corn basis-wise than they would have liked here this year, because we continue to go through this transition phase from the drought year we had going into 2013 when the pipeline was very empty. The farmer did not have any grain left on the farm. The elevators were pretty much empty, and we've been trying to catch up ever since then. And even the processor markets of Illinois have had to pay a lot more for corn this fall than they wanted to have to. You talk about the Peoria Pekin markets having to pay overs all fall and up until this point continuing. And if you're a buyer of grain, that's not an advantageous situation. I think Murray mentioned Iowa bases. I mean, Cedar Rapids corn is posted at 4 over this morning, and they were 10 to 12 over here earlier this week, right? And that's just unheard of numbers for central Iowa, right? But they've had some weather issues, but it's been a challenge on the basis side to predict what's going to happen. And I think, and part of that is just a pattern of farmer selling. Can we poll the audience, Todd?
Sure.
If you produce corn or have interest in corn, raise your hand. Good.
How many produce corn? There you go.
No, go, keep them up.
Uh,
Simon says, if you still got old crop corn to sell, lower your hand. And that's been the challenge, right? Is when is the farmer going to sell grain? And I think a very reluctant seller up to this point than what we've seen the last couple weeks, been a large seller of beans since harvest, not so much on corn. And that continues to be the challenge from the basis side, is when is the producer going to sell? I think we've seen some increase in farmer selling the last month or so, and we've seen basis levels kind of flatten out to weaken a little bit. And I think as we move forward, if the farmer continues to be an active seller of corn, it's going to be tough to see at least the old crop basis rally a whole lot, because up to this point, it's been the smallest, biggest crop we've ever seen from a basis standpoint, right? You're talking about over levels, and we're talking about a 14 billion bushel crop, and you're talking about, you know, March, May corn spread getting into 4 to 5 cents. Those things just don't go together. So I think as we transition into this fall with another good crop, I think you're going to see basis react a little to the weaker side, and we're going to see some bigger carries forced back into the market, at least on the corn side.
That was really nice. That was a good way to pull. Did you catch what he did with you? What did he ask you? How many of you raised corn? Everybody held their hand up. And then what was the second question? Who's got corn to sell? Do what? Lower. And everybody lowered. Yeah, so all we saw was the people who were sold out already. There were like 4 guys out there. How about that? Normally we wouldn't get that kind of reaction. Nice job. That's a good deal. Okay, questions from you out here. Who's got a question for them? Anybody? On the cash market? Yep.
If we have a decent crop this year, what do you anticipate carry from December 14th to July 15th? Will we stay where we're at, or will that get a larger carry?
If we have a decent crop, what will carry look like from the Dece to the July 14 to 15?
I've been asking this with a lot of people I've spoken in front of this winter. What do you think our national yield would be with a perfect weather pattern? Anybody have a wild guess? I mean, 175 out of question? You know, the outlook for them initially said, what, 165, 166, I believe. And so, you know, that's with average weather. All right. And so here's my challenge for you. You know, take 86 or 87 million harvested acres times 175. And what do you get? You're looking at a carryout of 3 to 4 billion bushels if you have an excellent growing season. And so, by all means, that sounds a little burdensome, but guys, that's the reality that we live in, is that is possible. And so if that's possible, then I want to change my mentality just a little bit, more to a locking in profit and then defending my position type situation, rather than what we've been doing the last several years. And I think if we're all honest with ourselves in this room, many of us have been poor marketers and made a ton of money doing it. And so, I mean, that's the truth, is it not? You know, we didn't have to be good marketers, guys. Let's just face it. For several years in a row, we didn't have to be great marketers, and we still made a lot of money. And so I think that the days of that sort of a marketing strategy and making the kind of money that we've made are over. And so I'm more of a, you know, lock in profit and defend your strategy.
Yes.
We had on USDA reports, you know, 2010, 2011, you know, we had that discrepancy of 300 million bushel of corn. And I guess they tried to correct it a little bit by doing that 50 million, so you might say that we're having 250 million discrepancy. If you take that 250 discrepancy that we've never really come to grips with, and you take it off, say the 1.5 that we have now, I mean, you get down to like 1.3, and then maybe that's what the market is trying to recognize,
So-
that maybe the volume of corn we have out there.
So the question is about the fabled 300 million bushels that we talked about for 3 or 4 years that sort of comes and goes depending on the grain stocks report and the time, and whether it might come back again at some point. And since we're already at 1.5 billion bushels for the carryout, could we push that down to 1.2 or 1.3? And will it come back? And if it does, is the March number the time that it does?
Well, I suppose anything's possible, but if basis levels were extremely strong everywhere across the Midwest, I think I might tend to believe that, but I think the basis levels are stronger for old crop, especially in the eastern Corn Belt. I think a couple of things. I mean, we've been trying to, as Aaron said, it's the smallest big crop we've ever had, and we're trying to, understand why that is. Two things I've thought of is I think the crop wasn't near as good in Illinois, maybe as it was in Iowa and some other places. When we get our county by county breakdowns, I think that'll, I think they're out now, and we'll see that. Yeah. The other thing is I think we've built a lot of space, a lot of storage space over the last 5 or 6 years. Almost every elevator has upgraded facilities. Farmers have built bins for a while there, if you weren't on a bin list, you weren't going to get it built that year. So I think that has spread out the supply issue that we've had in the fall in the past, where you have the real wide basis in the fall and then it snaps back right after harvest.
Oh.
I just went back, as I knew somebody would ask about basis levels in the fall, and I just looked at what our basis was on October 1 each of the last 5 years, and the average basis has been 7 under December. When I started, it was 20 to 25 under. Yeah. That was average. Now it's 7. The 5-year average is 7 under. And I'm not saying, I understand we could have a big crop and basis could get wider. I'm just saying 7 under has been the 5-year average. It is what it is.
Oh, yeah. So, he wants to know about what impact, if any, on ethanol. And maybe, Greg, you can start here, because I bet you guys have talked about this a little bit more than most, because of Marathon being an owner. The RFS, what EPA still has yet to do with it, and if they change it or lower it, they drop it back.
That's a political football, if there ever was one, and there's lots of lobbying going on. When the EPA first said 13 million, people screamed, and now the latest I've heard is they're going to maybe do some kind of compromise at 13 and a half. But what we have to keep in mind is that's the minimum, or that's the minimum we can use. But if the economics support producing more ethanol, there's nothing that says we can't do 14 or 15. So I think it all boils down to economics, outside of the fact that when that gets announced the day of, it does have a psychological impact on the market.
Can I go back to something you mentioned and maybe talk to each of you about this and how the basis has changed over the last 5 years? Because I think I had operated under the assumption for a long time that the growth of the ethanol market, and this is in large part the underlying, I think, reason behind why basis has changed, but I hadn't thought about what it meant in terms of that change from 20 to 7 under over the last 5 years, and how long that might last. So do we actually have a different, so when I visualize the marketplace, I visualize a flat landscape with Iowa, Illinois, Indiana, Missouri, and then as the crop grows, I see that fill up with corn. And then I see, in my own mind, ADM, and I see Cedar Rapids, I see Decatur, Cedar Rapids, and the river system sucking corn out of the system, so that if those are the primary places, I think, that suck, you're welcome. Beforehand, the grain trying to get into those would pile up, because it would have to come from out and then pile up trying to get in, so they would stop you and say, no, we're going to put it at 25 under or 30 under, or if you were in the Minnesota, 50 under, or wherever it happened to be. But now you have ethanol plants that have dotted the landscape, and they've changed the whole way that structure moves grain out. So the way that the whole thing comes down, so it's not all going down one drain, it's going down a whole bunch of drains. And that basis means a lot more locally than it ever did in the past. I know it meant a lot in your back pocket, but it means, for instance, in your Everly, Iowa facility, they have been telling us for, a month and a half that they're only 10 under, but that it's softening, and that they have a lot of corn, and they raised a lot of grain. Now, they're just to the south of where all the acres were not planted, and they're just to the north of the dry area in Cedar Rapids, but locally, they have ethanol plants that are using all of their grain up and they don't have to ship it off anywhere. I mean, how has it changed in your minds in terms of over the past 5 years, total basis across the landscape?
I think you hit it right on the head. The ethanol plants that we didn't have years ago need corn every month, and for a long time, farmers were not willing to hold on to corn into the summer. I mean, there was just too great of a quality risk. So the ethanol plants had to pay a big basis level to incent farmers to store grain into the summer. A lot of them built space. So now, once you have a bin, you might as well fill it. That grain does not have to come to town in the fall. So I think it's smoothed out the basis curve. Instead of having that sharp drop off in the fall and then a sharp rebound, I think there's more space out there. So I just don't think the basis levels get as bad in the fall. Maybe they don't get as good in the summer because of this, but I think it smoothed things out.
I think the only thing that could maybe change that a little bit, and I'm assuming Greg would agree with me on this, is if we do back-to-back big crops. Then I do think your basis could get pretty weak in the middle of this harvest coming up. Now, it'll be interesting if it gets as weak as maybe what we'd seen before. It will, because I agree with Greg. There's so many channels that are sucking corn out of the equation that it has leveled things out a little bit. But keep in mind that this fall, if we do grow a big crop, guys, I think that you're looking at, because we're going to have plenty of corn going into the fall, you're going to be looking at a fairly weak basis situation in the middle of harvest.
Because there were a lot of hands that were raised that still have old crop corn, and probably there'll be a few of you that still have that going into new crops. So, yeah.
Other questions out here? Anybody got one? Where's it at? Where's my question? I think I saw one. No? All right. Yeah.
Give me a breakdown of an ethanol plant into ethanol, DDGs, what constitutes 56 pounds of corn?
Okay, so if you have a bushel of corn, well, first, I want to know whether it weighs 56 pounds or 54 pounds, because I've always been confused by that. I think number 2 yellow corn actually weighs 54 pounds. For some reason, that's what it weighs when it gets to the Gulf or someplace else, but not when they purchase it. I don't know why that is. And then, but out of that bushel, how does it break down into what's left? So if an ethanol plant takes it, it becomes what, 2.8 gallons? How much of the weight becomes ethanol? How much becomes DDGs? Those sorts of things.
I feel ashamed. I work for a company that produces ethanol, and I don't know the answer to that. I think we've had ethanol experts on the panel in the past,
Yeah,
and I took notes, but I don't remember exactly.
You know, I just saw that in print somewhere. Where was that? Was Jonathan Coppice, where are you? Is that up on the Farm Doc site now? Do you recall the breakdown of a bushel of corn? I just saw it. I'll try to find it. I don't remember, but I just saw it. So it's out there on the web somewhere. Okay. Other questions? All right. With that, we're going to let these guys go, but we're going to give them a final. Do you have a final thought on the marketplace? We'll start with you, Matt Bennett.
I think going into this year, one of the biggest things that I've seen that bothers me is the lack of producers understanding what their break-even cost of production is. And so we've been strongly advocating using, like a profitability spreadsheet. There's different things out there, different tools that you can use, but if nothing else, pen and paper. But guys, we need to know what our cost of production is. It's different for the home farm that we own where we don't have any land costs, and then the farm that we're cash renting so we can hold on to. We need to know what our cost of production is because, our profitability is significantly lower than what it's been in the last few years, and don't go to sleep on this market. I'd like to be sitting up here and be bullish because I farm, and I'm usually bullish. And Todd's told me before I'm always bullish. But I think I'm a little more realistic maybe than anything this year. And I think the reality of the situation is that whenever we go to our bankers this year or have gone to our bankers this year, our cash flows, if we're being honest, don't look near as good as what they've been looking the last few years. So we need to be smart. We need to be better producers, and we need to learn quite a bit about these last few years, take a little bit from each one of them, and understand what we're going to have to do to be profitable.
Aaron Curtis?
I agree. I think you got to continue to be scale-up sellers, both old crop and new crop, and I think you need to pay attention to what basis and spreads continue to tell you. I think we focus a little bit too much on flat price sometimes, and if we focus a little more on basis and spreads, is it telling you to sell now? What's basis worth today versus what it's worth tomorrow? What's the spreads telling you? Do they want it now or do they want it later? And I think some of those things can be advantageous as far as what the market's trying to tell you to do with your cash grain.
And Greg.
Big picture, there's two items that I hope I live long enough to, I think I will see become to the forefront of ag policy, and Murray touched on one of them, is water. Water is going to be a big issue in the future, but another one that's maybe just snuck up on us here is pollination drift. There are some varieties of corn being introduced out in Nebraska, for example, that are great for ethanol plants, but they're not good for food grade manufacturers, and they are limiting. They don't want farmers growing that kind of corn next to a field of food grade corn, for example. What if they do, is my question. Who's liable? Is anybody liable? What's going to happen? It's not a big issue here in the Illinois and Indiana area yet, but it is in Nebraska this year already. There are some very tense words being said between neighbors, and that's an issue that's only going to get bigger and bigger. That, along with the water rights and the water issues, I think those are two things that we need to keep an eye on and be part of in the public policy process.
Okay, I was right. I did see it on the web, on the breakdown of it's so small I can't read it, and I don't think it's all there. But not this week on Monday, but on the previous Monday, Daryl Good wrote about it in his post on the Farm Doc Daily website, and I think it is titled "Potential Growth in Corn Used for Ethanol Production." I'll come and talk to you about it, but I saw 16 pounds, I think, from DDGs out of a bushel. So roughly speaking, we can work through that process. So it is there, and it's on the Farm Doc Daily website. Give these guys a nice round of applause.